We have a shocking new update in the case of a pastor's son accused of holding 4 people in his basement against their will for as long as a decade. He is now charged with murder.
In addition to murder, Donnie Ray Birchfield Jr. was also charged today with first-degree criminal sexual conduct.
What we know about the woman allegedly found dead inside his house and the 3 other people who law enforcement rescued after years of alleged abuse. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. If what's being alleged in this case is true, the suspect is certainly a sick and twisted individual, but that suspect is also now an accused killer. The accused is Donnie Ray Birchfield Jr. He is a pastor's son in the small town of Lancaster, South Carolina. It's about an hour's drive from Charlotte. Now, Birchfield's social media shows him in pictures with family, and he also appears to be a really big pro wrestling fan. Actually, in one picture, it is him with a chain around his neck. Perhaps ironic, considering what he is accused of doing. Lancaster police just gave us an update on this case, and they released the first name of one of the 4 people they say were held captive by Birchfield inside of the home. Now, one person is believed to have been held captive for as long as a decade, allegedly. But the woman whose name was just released was allegedly murdered at the hands of Birchfield, and her sister-in-law is now speaking publicly about how her brother and his wife went missing for years. But before I get into that, let me remind you how all of this came to light. This is video per WSOC TV of the house where Birchfield allegedly lived and allegedly kept the husband and wife hostage, as well as 2 women who police have reportedly said Birchfield was romantically involved with. They were all allegedly held in the basement of this home. This story started on July 25th. It was around 11:45 in the morning. Police responded to Birchfield's home for what they said was a death report. And when they got to the home, they found a 49-year-old woman dead on the floor. According to arrest warrants obtained by the Post and Courier newspaper, which is the only outlet we've seen that has been able to get access to these arrest warrants, we have requested them. They have not been sent to us. The victim reportedly showed signs that she was physically denied food, water, and medical treatment.
The investigation into the cause and circumstances of the death of Miss Arnsdorff continued.
Now, that woman has been identified as 49-year-old Shirley Arnsdorff. Her husband was also allegedly being held captive by Birchfield inside the house. That man is reportedly alive. Now, I'll tell you what I've learned about Arnsdorff to this point in just a moment, but we know that her husband's family says that they had been looking for him for years. A woman told WSOC TV that her brother is one of the people who was trapped inside the house. She said she had been searching for her brother for years, but she couldn't find him. She even filed a missing persons report. She says that her brother has a developmental disability, but he lived on his own until a few years ago when he disappeared. She said when she saw her brother at the hospital, he looked to weigh about 70 pounds less than when she saw him last. Now, it's unclear how the couple came in contact with Birchfield and how they ended up in that home. It was reported that he was considered the sole caretaker for that couple. 6 days after Arnsdorff was found dead, Birchfield was taken into custody. He originally faced charges of 2 counts of neglect of a vulnerable adult and 2 counts of false imprisonment. He is also charged with 2 counts of domestic violence, high and aggravated nature, which is the most severe form of domestic violence in South Carolina, and he's also facing 2 counts of false imprisonment. Now, even though police have not said Arnsdorff's cause of death, the new bombshell twist is that this is no longer just a neglect case.
This morning, investigators with the Lancaster Police Department obtained warrants charging Donnie Ray Birchfield Jr. with the murder of Shirley Arnsdorff. In addition to murder, Donnie Ray Birchfield Jr. was also charged today with first-degree criminal sexual conduct. Mr. Birchfield is currently being held without bond on these charges at the Lancaster County Detention Center.
As we've been covering this story over the last few months, we've been putting Donnie Ray Birchfield's name into truthfinder.com to try to learn more information about him. Now, when you type his name in, the house where those 4 people were allegedly held captive, that comes up, as well as other information about him, including criminal history. And in that section, we do see the charges that he is facing in this case. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories, just like this one. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great resource to give you some peace of mind because it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Now, we know that Birchfield is being accused of physical abuse against the people who are allegedly held captive inside the home. Along with Arnsdorff and her husband, the two other people allegedly held captive were women who Birchfield was romantically involved with. One of them may be facing charges. Now, that is certainly an odd twist in this story. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But police say that one woman was allegedly held in the home since September of last year. The other, and this is shocking, was allegedly held in the home by Birchfield since 2015. Now, here's what we know about the alleged abuse that took place inside the home. According to police, through those warrants by the Post and Courier newspaper, Birchfield kept the four people in the basement, and they weren't allowed to leave unless he let them. Birchfield also reportedly controlled the victims' cell phones, and that stopped them from being able to call for help. He also allegedly controlled when they would eat and use the bathroom. Police say that Birchfield physically abused these victims, including allegedly strangling them. One woman allegedly told police that Birchfield threatened to kill her and her family, and that he knew how to get rid of a body from past experience. Now, here's what could be another interesting twist in this story, because I found two Facebook accounts of women who have pictures with Birchfield, and they appear to be romantically involved with him. Now, one account is of a woman with pictures with Birchfield, and they go back to roughly 2019. It appears she and him went to several events together. Her most recent post was of herself, though, outside on September 19th. She is at a cemetery. The other account appears to show a woman who was more recently, and potentially currently, romantically involved with Birchfield. The woman posted a picture that appears to show Birchfield kissing her on the forehead on June 12th. That is about a month and a half before police responded to the house for that suspicious death. It's also unclear if either of the women are victims of what Birchfield is accused of doing. But we did look up the names of the women in the South Carolina court database, and the woman with the more recent pictures kissing Birchfield came back showing that she was arrested on August 1st, the same day that Birchfield was. The address listed for this woman is the same home on Churchill Road where Birchfield is accused of holding the four people captive. Birchfield was arrested at that same address. The woman is facing a charge of failure to report abuse, neglect of a vulnerable adult. Now, according to online records, she posted a $2,000 surety bond on August 11th. Now, I'm not naming that woman at this point because we just don't know enough about her and the circumstances surrounding her arrest. Law enforcement has been very tight-lipped for a lot of this story. It's unclear if law enforcement sees her as a victim as well. Now, other than the statement from Lancaster Police on Facebook, I showed you some of it, they aren't releasing more information at this time, they tell us. Now, Birchfield does have at least one person in his corner as this story has come to light, and that is reportedly his sister, who posted on social media, quote, "Before you share or repost anything about my family, please stop and put yourself in our place. What if it were your son, your brother, or your friend being gossiped about and judged online? Spreading speculation, repeating unverified claims, and adding commentary only causes more harm. It's not helping anyone." Now, the murder and criminal sexual conduct charges bring the amount of charges that Birchfield is now facing to 18. He's also accused of financial crime. Since 2021, he allegedly used Arnsdorff and her husband's credit and debit cards to pay for at least $2,000 of items at Walmart, allegedly only for himself. He also allegedly spent $12,000 of that couple's money over the first 8 months of this year to pay off multiple credit cards. Birchfield's attorney previously told me, quote, "My office is currently investigating this matter, My client maintains his innocence in this case, and it is important to remember that he is presumed innocent of these allegations. We look forward to litigating this case in the court system where facts, evidence, and the rule of law matter. We will have no further comment at this time. We did notice that the church where Birchfield's dad is the pastor took down its Facebook page. It had regularly streamed its Sunday services. Joining us now from South Carolina is civil rights and criminal defense attorney Tyler Bailey. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. I know we talked about this case when it first came down, always shocking, but now that there's a murder charge and we know the name of this 49-year-old woman who was allegedly murdered by Donnie Ray Birchfield, what will prosecutors have to prove in this case when it comes to the murder charge?
Yeah, they're going to have to prove more than just abuse and neglect. They're going to have to prove that there's been some malice and forethought when it comes down to the murder of this unfortunate victim. It has to be intentional. It can't just be based off a victim in this situation dying because she was not fed or things of that nature. And it seems like that's what they're leading towards. They talked about there being strangulation and there also being starvation, that he was intentionally not allowing her to eat, which allowed her to be malnourished in such a weak condition that she could have been strangled and killed, or a combination of dying because she was weak, strangled, and malnourished.
Yeah, what's typically the bar? Because I found that interesting. I mean, clearly they had said reportedly that strangulation was involved, and I could see how that obviously could become a murder case. But for someone to be malnourished and for that to be the murder weapon in a way, in a murder case, I mean, what type of evidence would prosecutors need to have to prove that it was intentional?
Well, there'll probably have to be some sort of statements from others who are around that he was intentionally depriving her of food, not just this being a vulnerable adult who, just had a negligent person who's taking care of them, but this is more so intentionally starving the victim to death, which is just heinous to even think about. And the prosecutors would not have a reference to strangulation. That was referenced by the prosecutors and the police department here, if there wasn't evidence to support that from the coroner's investigation. And that shows more that she was not only being potentially starved, but potentially being strangled. And they'll be able to prove it with the facts of the case. And they came to this conclusion later because they probably wanted to make sure there's enough evidence for them to charge, because this is a high bar here. They have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, and they do not want to allow the defense an opportunity to exploit any weaknesses in the state's case, which could result in acquittal or possibly, reduced sentence.
And this seems, I mean, we can get into it just about how complicated this case seems, because by my count, there's 18 total charges now, and they range from neglect charges. Now we have the murder charge. There's this first-degree sexual conduct charge. And then there's the financial crimes he's accused of as well, of using the couple that he was allegedly the sole caretaker for, using their credit cards and debit cards to pay off credit cards for himself. So there's just a lot there. This new first-degree sexual conduct charge, I was unclear on whether or not it was for the 49-year-old woman who was allegedly killed. But knowing that he is now facing a sex crime charge, how does that factor in to the prosecution and everything that they're trying to go over in this case against Donnie Ray Birchfield Jr.?
So my first thought with the prosecutors and the police department being somewhat a little bit coy in announcing the murder charge and the first-degree criminal sexual conduct charge was that they possibly may be seeking a death penalty here, because that's an aggravating factor. And they're also looking at all the incidences of, using the financial car theft, using the car to pay his own debts, intentionally depriving the victims of food. There being strangulation. It seems to me that they are padding the deck to show there's overwhelming evidence to show the accused here should receive the supreme penalty, being the death penalty. You need an aggravating factor for the death penalty to be an option here in South Carolina. You also need a unanimous consent for the jury to impose the death penalty. And the judge also needs to believe that the death penalty is sufficient and not being recommended by the jury based off of prejudice or passion. And so I think that's why you see all these charges being outlined by the prosecution here. And now with this murder charge and possibly an aggravating factor in first-degree criminal sexual conduct, there's enough that they may be seeking a death penalty.
And I mean, you just think of, at least that one sentence of how this 49-year-old woman, Arnsdorff's her last name, Shirley Arnsdorff, how she died, if true, strangulation, but then also making sure that she didn't have the food in her body that she needed to survive. It's just horrific. And that's why this is now, according to police, a murder investigation. But if without the murder charge, can you get someone the death penalty? Because if you think of holding someone against their will for 10 years, that's horrific. If she died from a neglect situation, that's certainly horrific. Does it need to be murder to actually reach the threshold of the death penalty?
Here, you would need murder for there to be the death penalty. In this case, there's a lot of crimes here. If he was sentenced consecutively, that he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. I did the math. You know, you're looking to sentence a sentence of over 100 years if he's convicted of all these charges. But the death penalty would not have been on the table. And for the fact that now they're announcing murder and the sex crime, which is an aggravating factor, you know, it could be something that the prosecution is seeking to put on the table. And, you know, this is just a terrible case. This is something that sounds like a scary movie, right? You don't think about things like this happening. And it happening in South Carolina. You know, the prosecutors up there with this happening in their backyard, I'm pretty sure they want to send a message that the people want, which is this has no place in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think too, I mean, just how complicated this story is. And I was just saying, you know, it's financial, murder investigation, you have a sex crimes investigation that's involved here. How does the prosecution, and even for the defense, for the person who's going to defend him, if this even goes to trial, how do you piece through all the different information that could go back 10 years when it comes to a woman was allegedly being held against her will for that long? This just seems like if it needed to be, that this would be a case that would go on for years.
It could be, but, you know, I think that you go to the beginning, right? Back in 2015, when I believe that some of the victims said they were first being held against their will. And the fact that cards and transactions were being used puts a timeline that they can show from whether the vulnerable adults that were there, the husband and wife, and then the other victims, if they can prove based off the car use, based off of testimony of these victims who were there since 2015, of only being allowed to leave at certain times, the physical abuse, the mental abuse, the malnourishment by withholding of food, people are kind of in a daze, which would allow the defendant here more control. So I think they'll have to outline that case through victim testimony, but also through documents that they can corroborate because they're transactions. And for the defense, they have to try to attack everything. You know, maybe from the investigation standpoint, say maybe the victims here were actually willing participants and they couldn't leave, but they decided to come back. It's a strong case to win for the defense here, and murder and a sex crime on top of that makes it, in my opinion, even more of a high burden to get a acquittal or get some of these charges dropped. But the prosecution is going to be very meticulous how they outline their case, and the defense is going to attack every piece they can to do whatever they can for their client here.
Because what's being alleged is horrific. I mean, you just can't say it enough. But then at the same time, I mean, we've seen some of these cases where someone's accused of holding someone captive and there's no chains, no locks on doors. There's a lot of it that is mental. And there's still a lot of information that we're waiting on this one. But what makes cases like this complicated to actually prove? Because if there's evidence that any of these victims ever left the home, I could see a defense attorney arguing that they were on their free will, that they could have gone to the police at some point, but they didn't. They came back.
Yeah, but you also got to look about the power dynamics here. It's not, if this is going back to 2015, no access to any financial resources, no connections with any family, being physically abused. There's information out there about one of the victims saying that the defendant here said he knew how to dispose of a body from prior incidents. So there's that fear dynamic. So it is hard for the prosecution to win that case without showing a full picture of the experience that these victims were going through. Whether photographs that are likely going to be heinous, there could be door locks on doors. So it's not as cut and dry as it may seem on paper about it being easy to show that these individuals left there and came back. There could be evidence out there of him going back to get them, telling them you better be here. There could be threats to the other victims that, hey, if she doesn't return, I'm gonna kill your sister victim here, right? So there's a lot of different dynamics that are at play, and I believe the prosecution wants to paint that full picture for the jury.
What do you make of just the timeline where they respond to the home? I think it was July 25th was the date. He's arrested on August 1st, and then here we are in October, and they're still adding charges. How long typically does an investigation like this go until you have to at some point say, okay, we're ready to see and go to a trial?
I think we're coming towards the end of it. The fact that there's murder and the sex crime that he's been charged with now shows that the state here, they looked at all the evidence and it wasn't passing the muster. It wasn't adding up. They thought there was something more there. And so I'm pretty sure the pathologists, the crime scene investigators, they had to take time to look into these things and speak to the victims and see what other evidence is out there. And so that was in July. We're about 6 months out. I think they'll probably come to the close of their investigation, and they'll eventually will continue to march forward towards a trial. More evidence will continue to be outlined and given to the defense in discovery. But I don't think this is going to be a situation where there's going to be 2 more years and they're still looking for more charges. It's clear now here that they have enough charges to move forward with a range of possible convictions that the state can bring, all the way up to the possibility of the death penalty on the table. And I think that's to force the defendant to make a decision whether they're pleading immediately or possibly if you go to trial, knowing what the stakes are.
The death penalty, certainly it's a controversial topic from state to state, but do you see in South Carolina, in cases like this where a prosecutor can use that as leverage against a defendant, that it's effective when it comes to trying to get a plea deal?
Highly effective. A lot of times where the death penalty is on the table and they're seeking a plea or seeking more information from the defendant, possibly about something else. One thing that stood out to me is that he said that he knows how to dispose of a body from a prior incident. Now, if he is accurate on that information, it could be that he has knowledge of possibly a cold case that's out there that may be of interest to the state, and that could be a bargaining tool for there to be a plea offer to the defendant and the death penalty be taken off the table. So a lot of times in these cases where you have multiple victims, heinous charges, a lot of risk for the defendant, but also maybe cold cases that the state wants to close, and this person has that information that could bring closure to a family, it sometimes is a bargaining chip that's used on both sides, not just the state with their prosecution, but also the defendant that may have information of prior murders that he could have been involved in, and possibly the location of the remains. And I've seen that same situation happen in cases here in South Carolina before.
He's reportedly the son of a notable pastor in Lancaster, South Carolina, which seems like a smaller community. How common is it in South Carolina when you have a high-profile case like this in a smaller, more rural community, and even if it's a name that people know in the community, that a case like this could get moved somewhere else?
It's possible. It is theoretically possible, but mostly, they want to have the case heard by the people who are impacted in that community, by a jury of their peers. And it's a small community, so there's going to be people who may know the accused and have good things to say about them or good things to say about his family. All right. But this is not going to be a case where it could be moved to another location in the state and nobody has any information about it. It's been pretty widely covered here. And then once the jurors start to hear the facts, they're going to come up with their own thoughts immediately anyway. So I don't think a change of venue really serves a real a solid purpose in this situation. I haven't heard discussions of the venue being changed. It's not oftentimes in South Carolina where we of course do allow for a change of venue for a different county, but it could be used. But it's a small town and everybody probably knows more information about just personal interactions they've had with the accused, the family. There could be suspicions, or they could be thinking, how could this have happened under our nose for all these years and nobody knew about it?
And then you have, at this point, 4 alleged victims, each one with, from what it seems, a different experience with the accused and what happened. Is there a possibility that there could be 4 different trials? What goes into determining whether each victim would have their own trial? Because a murder case could be very different from a neglect case, and the experience of one victim could be very different from the experience of another.
I don't think there will be just for the cost involved for the state to try
Right.
this numerous times. You have one defendant and different victims, but it's all from the same facts and circumstances of four individuals being kidnapped or being held, right, captive essentially in his house and subject to various crimes. So it would be a little different if you had different locations, right, different incidences of him maybe committing this against one victim in 2015, another one in 2019, same county, but different facts and circumstances or different locations. We don't have that situation here, so I do not see there being a different trials for each victim. It's still the state versus the accused, and the victims will testify regarding the different counts of criminal charges that the accused is being subject to here.
Yeah, just such a difficult case every single time it comes up, and we'll continue to follow it here on Law and Crime. Tyler Bailey, it's always great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.